welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. A little over a week ago, Nigeria celebrated the silver anniversary of her unbroken democratic rule. Although the real handover date to a democratically elected government was the 29th of May 1999, Nigeria has since adopted June 12 in memory of that day 31 years ago, when the country was said to have conducted its freest and fairest elections, but the results were annulled. In his speech to commemorate the day, President Bola Tinubu paid tribute to the great heroes and heroines who sacrificed their very lives. He also went on to mention names of those who died in the struggle and those who are still living. In the words of the president, despite the lethal might of the military government, what appeared to be high and unyielding walls of dictatorship came tumbling down. The dismal fortress exists no longer. The question many are now asking 25 years down the line is, what now exists in place of the dismal fortress which Nigerians fought tirelessly to pull down? Have the labors of heroes past now gone in vain, just like the national anthem from which that line was called? Or was the country all along in search of an economic democracy, but instead fought for a political one? What is the nexus between democracy and the rule of law? These are some of the questions that we will ponder on tonight on Hard Copy. My guest is Gloria Balasin, who is a lawyer and Chief Executive Officer of the House of Justice, a leading public interest law center. Ms. Balasin, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the first question that came to my mind when I was thinking of interviewing you was, just where were you when, democracy was restarted in the Fourth Republic, when former general, well, he's now a former general, but former head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, then handed over to former President Olusegun Obasanjo in 1999.
I was in JAS in Plateau State. I was in the secondary school. I think I must have been in SS2 or so. And, there was all of that apprehension and doubts as to whether he was really going to hand over to a democratically elected government.
Apprehension.
Yes.
And as a student in secondary school, you felt it.
We absorbed it. It wasn't difficult to feel the pulse in the air. The innocence of children at that time was stolen. There were conversations around what the real dangers were that the military posed at the time. I do remember that whenever we were to go on outings, you would hear our head teachers telling us to be careful whatever we said out of town, because our safety wasn't guaranteed if we said something that went against the grain. So we already felt like, we are in a danger zone, and even though we couldn't quite say what the full implication was, but you felt a sense of danger. And when he handed over to a democratically elected government, there was that sense of peace, and people were jubilating. And joy is contagious, so we also joined in the joy of it.
But then I do not know what it was like for you, but did you have high hopes about what a democracy was supposed to deliver, having grown up really largely under a military government?
Yes, I did. My dad was very big on governance and whatever good governance entailed and should entail. And there was generally that sense of, if the military went, that things were going to be better. And so we felt like, there is so much promise that comes with democratic rule. Of course, that was what was conveyed to us. Our parents always spoke about, for instance, how that they had to queue, particularly during the Buhari era, for necessaries like bread and the war against indiscipline and how people were reduced. But of course, we also knew about those who were imprisoned. I had friends in school whose parents were in prison while we were at school because they were in the military. They were probably indicted of coups, So we knew those stories, and so the thought and the belief then was that when the democratic rule came, people would be able to own their voice. and that life would generally be easier. But also the fact that people were living in fear. Democracy meant, as it was conveyed to us then, that people will be able to walk the free soil. So we felt that this democracy should be something that we should all welcome, even though we were children at the time.
It's interesting, because I had a different experience in the sense that, because of all of the economic hardship, that was also a hallmark of the let's say the military hunters at that time. There was also plenty of hope that that democracy was going to, bring a lot of economic prosperity. There was also that hope. I do not know if it was also something that people also expected in your part of the world.
Yes, certainly. During the military era, most of our schoolmates whose parents were in the military were the ones who had the money, and it was clear money, you could see it. And so the rest of us would watch them in awe. It was like an exclusive world where economic prosperity was tied to militarization and the people who worked in that sector. And the feeling was that with democracy, the goodies will go round. So we also looked forward to that economic prosperity. And I do remember that when Obasanjo came into government, there was that increase of salary that was like free fall. And I remember this woman who was talking about how when the fortunes changed, we were like those who dream. I really remember that story. But we saw our, parents change cars. We saw things become better. In my primary two, we were singing poems about SAP's structural adjustment program and how it was biting hard and how rice was for the rich. And we saw that rice was no longer a Sunday thing. People were looking better. And so at the start of democracy, you could see the telltale signs that, look, things were looking up, and that there was promise that could be fulfilled. And some of the promise were being fulfilled, really.
But 25 years down the line, how much of that promise would you say that has been fulfilled for the generality of Nigerians, given where we are? You just mentioned a bag of rice. It's interesting that a few days ago, a bag of rice was trending on the social media, and it was about how a lot of people could not afford a bag of rice, especially for the Salah celebration. So how far down the line would you say that democracy has really delivered on the promise of economic prosperity, for instance, when you look at where we're coming from and just where we are?
It's promise that is not being fulfilled, and this is how it kind of feels. It feels like at the start of it, promise was being fulfilled, we were getting the dividends, and then everything was mopped back. So we're really back to those days where there was that conversation around rice being for the rich. And it's even worse now because, again, on social media, and this is a reality that people live through, many people couldn't even afford tomatoes. There was also the trending conversation around, before you buy your ram, be sure you have the tomatoes and the pepper. But the truth is that many people couldn't afford all of that. Now, it's important to contextualize that in the basics, because economics is not high-sounding intellectual discourse. It is a reality that people live in and live through. And the economic situation of our country has become really worse off. You find that a lot of people cannot even afford to eat. You find people cannot move easily. So there is hardly food on the table, clothes on the back is luxury, roofs overhead is luxury. And we're back to those days where it's no longer military, but it is democracy. However, it is democracy without the dividends. And so really it leaves a lot to be desired, because it's like hope deferred that makes the heart sick.
Indeed. Well, you went on, right in the democratic dispensation to study law. And I'm sure that, through your own study and later practice of law, you might have appreciated that, this is one thing to hope. It's another thing to know that you have to work to actually actualize your hope. And I think that's something that lawyers are taught. The fact that, entrenching the rule of law, for instance, is something that has to be a daily work in progress. Yeah. So would you say that many Nigerians were aware at that time? Because all of these hopes which we had of how a democracy was automatically supposed to, make a lot of things happen, would you say that we're really aware of how much work was going to be needed to put in to make the democracy work?
I'm not sure it is about being aware as it is about the unwillingness to put in the work. The military gave Nigeria its constitution, the 1999 constitution. And section 14, subsection 1 says that the Nigerian state shall be based on the ideals of democracy and social justice. So what really the constitution does is to provide a compass. And even for the military, although they were going to hand over, people can argue about, whether this constitution needs review and all of that. But the reality is, if we can stick with what the roadmap for the constitution is, we would go somewhere. So, does the democracy have social justice? Is a good question to ask. And what is social justice? The feeling that you give right to who is right, you give wrong to who is wrong, you provide, necessaries for the people, and people can get by in a society that is theirs and in a country that, they claim as theirs. And we don't see that happen. The idea about democracy is to put people at the center and not at the fringe. And once you have a situation where people cannot afford necessaries, when it feels as if they are, aliens in their own land, then they cannot have that sense of belonging. So the economy of the country has made things really difficult. There is a sense in which economic prosperity gives people a sense of belonging. And that also takes us to even the issue around how national cohesion, is affected. Economy has something to do with national cohesion. When you speak with people from different parts of the country, there is often the assumption that the other people at the other side are having it better. But in reality, when we look at it, the grass is not really greener on the other side.
Let's take on the issue of the rule of law, because you have now worked in that sector for a while, seeking to get people justice, through the work that you have done over the years. I'm wondering, the judiciary has always been a part of our government, whether in military rule or even in a democracy. How would you say the judiciary has evolved over, these years of military rule to, where it is currently in our democratic rule? Is it delivering on the rule of law and justice?
The judicial powers of any state is vested in the courts. And it's one thing to have the power, it's another thing to utilize that power for public good. For most people who have reviewed and compared the judiciary under the military and the judiciary under democracy, it would appear that the judiciary under the military was even more bold. Because when you look at some of the government, some of the judgments and what they had to face, under military rule, you marvel at the sense in which there was clarity in taking on issues. It does appear that when things seem to be, all rosy, we begin to take things for granted. But it's important that a judiciary of any country, whether it's in military rule or democracy, is consistent, because it is that sector that is like the leverage for every other thing. It should be the sacred place where if everything fails, we can go to the judiciary and be able to say, well, here everything stops and we're able to get redress. So in terms of the work that should go on in the judiciary, every now and again, we have great judges who do the work. But there's also much to be desired. And I think in recent times, one of the things that a lot of citizens found jarring was the inability for the judiciary to uphold the participation of the people in their own government, which is guaranteed by Section 14 of the 1999 Constitution. So if you have people going to vote for certain candidates, and then by whatever reason, that vote is overturned by any power, whether it's INEC or Judiciary, it doesn't help the cause of democracy, because the people are supposed to participate in their own government.
I was going to ask you why the rule of law is so important in a democracy, but I think that you've already spoken to some aspects of it.
Yeah.
Some people have also argued that perhaps the reason why we're not yet experiencing the dividends as we might want to experience them is because we have not quite found the mode that suits us. President Obasanjo, former President Obasanjo, has been speaking very eloquently now about Africa and Nigeria developing its own homegrown democracy. Right now in the House or in the National Assembly, we're getting a number of lawmakers who are coming together to say, look, we need to return to a parliamentary system of government, that this presidential system is not working for us. It's too expensive. It's hard to remove whoever is there as leader, especially if the person is bad. You have to wait 4 years, because of the tenure, etc., etc. So we have this list, and we've seen over the years attempts since we returned to this democracy. 2 national confabs, almost every 4-year cycle of the National Assembly attempts to amend the Constitution, and we see it on and on. Do you think that this is about the mode of governance or the intentions and commitment of our political class?
The process cannot be more important than the outcome. We cannot be talking about having homegrown, even if we have a homegrown democracy and we give it a name, the question will still remain, will it deliver on its promise? It's the promise delivery that is more important in a democracy than the form. But
if the formula is wrong, wouldn't the results be different?
Not exactly. For those who are good in maths, they know that there are means and ways where you can arrive at answers. Your formula may not exactly be the same as the one that somebody worked out, but if you're able to navigate towards an answer, you find an answer. You may not get the whole marks, but you're going to get away with some marks, which is quite different from subjects like English, where you either know it or you don't know it. So the sense in which we must, where we should focus our energies on is in looking at what would make democracy attractive to the people. And once you can have a democracy where people feel a sense of belonging and they're not hungry and they have the basics, by whatever name you call it, the people will just be home and dry. So I would say that rather than just putting in all of that energy to try to find a formula to eat, we should be more invested in the delivery of the dividends of the democracy. If the judiciary is working, if there are laws that ensure that things run smoothly, if the executive meet up to the obligations of the office, we will have a system that will deliver on its promise. So I do not think that the inhibitions that we imagine our democracy to have really exist. I think it exists only in the figment of our minds. But once we can ensure that things work out well.
You think so? I mean, there is money that has to be spent. I mean, right now we've talked about how our democracy is basically a cash and carry democracy. He who has the greatest amount of money carries the day, be it president, and even the presidential system being too expensive, one person having to campaign all over the entire country, and getting people all over the country to be able to vote for him or her. That alone, they say it already excludes a number of people, and that ought not to be. Unlike if you have a parliamentary system where all you have to do is win a small area and everybody goes to parliament, just like you have in the House of Reps, and then they elect a leader there. Do you see, I mean, I do not know how you quantify the influence of money in corrupting the processes that we have in our current democracy.
The issue of money and how it impinges on governance in Nigeria is really about the orientation that we have given as a country. And so we're running to that point where we're a country where we're so poor that all that we see is money. The influences in the judiciary, the influences in the legislature, the influences in the executive are tied to money. But it now speaks to why we need leadership that has that commands, moral respect and emphasizes money and upholds values. So we must uphold our national values to be able to say, look, you may have money, but the conversation is not about money. The conversation is about performance. So whether it's the parliamentary where you're talking about where we say, people should be able to, it makes it easier for people to evolve without having to spend money, you can still have that system being corrupted. What our major challenge is that we honor our laws in breach rather than in compliance. You will have the INEC voting and stating that, this is only the amount of money that can be spent during campaigns. And the laws will be broken. But the INEC itself will not even supervise its own laws to ensure that it is being respected and obeyed. You would see that also happening in other quarters. People seeking for money and going after money with even monies that they don't necessarily need. And that is where the issue of national orientation is important. How people need to understand that money is not the be-all and end-all. And that in the issue of governance, when you have an economy that is even and people have, it's better than you having a few people with the money bags who don't even know what to do with the money while the rest of the people are languishing, because even they themselves, they are not safe if you have a set of people who are marginalized and who out of the anger they will become enemies of the state. Those are the things that you don't want to see. So the issue about money as to how it affects our governance is something that will be addressed in terms of reorientation, as opposed to just thinking that money is the devil. We can put money to proper use if we uphold morality and values over money.
So for those who did not have the privilege, you and I have had the privilege of witnessing a military regime, and enjoying this democratic dispensation, if we can use the term enjoying, this democratic dispensation. For those who did not experience a military regime and are really, really despondent with what democracy has delivered so far, when they look at Nigeria and look at other countries around, what would you say to them?
I would say that people should not require change just for the sake of change. There must be clarity about what kind of change are they looking for. There are some people who didn't experience military rule who are craving for military rule. They're saying anything other than this democracy, because this democracy is not working for us. But for those of us who felt the two worlds, we know that you don't even want to have the conversation around going back to military rule. But then again, we cannot live in that utopia of feeling that things cannot happen. We have seen our neighboring countries around Nigeria fall back to military rule, which means that the very moment where a system of government is not working, the people can decide to change, or you can have factors that will incur into the system that exists. And so these are the things that we must guard against, pushing the system to that point where there is nowhere else to go. And so people now fall back to the next thing, which may not work out well. I think it's important that we invest in this democracy. I think it's important that people take back the power and insist on the kind of changes that they want to see. It's also important that we should have consistency. And speaking of consistency, it should lead us to incremental progress. It may not be progress with the speed with which we want, but a journey of 1,000 kilometers still begins with a step, and if that step is consistent, you could get to the end of your journey. So I would say that rather than wanting another system of government, the democratic system has been deemed to be the one that, because people have experimented with different systems of government, and the generality, a majority of people and nations believe that democracy is the one that is at least the most preferable of all the other systems. So now that we are here, and it doesn't necessarily mean that time will not come where different concepts will not evolve. But let's work with what we have while we look forward to what can be better. But over and beyond that, we cannot be more interested in the packaging rather than what is on the inside. So we need to put pressure on those in government to deliver on what the mandate of their office requires.
Ms. Gloria Balasan, we have to thank you for coming on Hard Copy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's the program. If you'd like to get your voice heard on this topic, to reach out to us using the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Yusuf. Good night.